Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining the session on internet use and safety for the family. My name is Deacon Christian, and I'm from the Department of Internet Ministries at the Archdiocese. And today we're going to go through some of the slides that I have prepared. Before we start, I see some of you are still trickling in to the session, but just so that we can be on time, I'm going to start the presentation. It is also recorded for those of you who would like to listen to it later on or miss some parts of it, and towards the end you can listen to that. Before we start, I would like to start with a small prayer, if that's okay with everybody, and we'll begin. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. O Heavenly King, Comforter, the Spirit of truth, who art everywhere present and filleth all things, the treasury of good things and giver of life, come and abide in us and cleanse us from every stain and save our souls, O good one. Amen. So as I said, I'm from the Department of Internet Ministries. I'm a deacon in the Antiochian Archdiocese. I serve in St. Peter and Paul in Potomac, Maryland. And I have a child, two children, a 12-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter. And we are all kind of concerned or are interested in knowing how to deal with the internet and apps and social media with our kids. So I thought maybe you could put, I've gathered some information here that I would like to share with you, primarily not from a perspective of a technologist, but more from human behavior and family upbringing and behavioral studies that I've gathered. I'm not an expert in any of these, but I had to study and learn some of this from a personal interest to bring up my children, as well as to share with the community. I've given a similar talk before. It was in person, so it was more interactive and workshop-like type of talk. So I expect a lot of interruptions and questions. So feel free to interrupt with questions. We're a small crowd, so unmute yourself and ask a question or interrupt me. Don't feel bad about that. If you don't like to unmute yourself, put it in the chat. I might not notice it for a while because I'll be looking at the screen, but I'll try to check on the chat session to see if there are any questions there. And if there's anything else, I think this is from a logistics perspective, so feel free to interrupt. I would like to start with a few kind of question slides, just to get our mindset in the mood for this type of discussion. And the first question I have here is a quote. Let's see if this will work. If you can read this statement and try to think who said this or what is it about, right? So it says, this discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls because they will not use their memories. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. There will be tiresome company having to show the show of wisdom without reality. So can someone guess what this discovery of yours is? What is the discovery that this person is warning about or complaining about? And who is this person speaking? Anybody can try to guess that? Let's see. All right, I guess nobody's going to take Plato. So okay, you're close. So it's Socrates. Yep, it's Socrates, and he's warning us about the written word, right? So at the time of Socrates, people would memorize things, right? And knowledge would transfer from one person to the other through reciting of things, right? The written word was not something common. And he was warning his disciples through the story that he relayed to them of how this would be disruptive and it will hurt their souls, right? And there will be a show of wisdom without reality. So this, if we go back in history, there are lots of similar events happening, right? People warned about the discovery of the radio and then the TV, and now with the internet, even with books, right? When the books were first, the printing machine came up, people were afraid of books in their houses and what that would do to the minds of their children. So this is normal. We are by nature afraid of new things. And most importantly, we're afraid of what they might bring in terms of negative effects to us and to those whom we love. So And I think most of us today are interested in this topic of how the internet and social media and apps are going to affect us and our children. So that's why, I mean, this concern is justified from that perspective. But this is not something new to humanity, right? And definitely not something new to the church and to the church fathers. There were always innovations happening throughout history that have kind of affected the family life and the church life and the upbringing of children. So so we have to kind of see what they've said. It's not like they haven't said anything. The fact that TikTok or Snapchat were not available to the days of St. John Chrysostom or St. Basil doesn't mean they were not aware of the effects of things like that on the human soul and the human relationship with each other. So so this kind of gives you a flavor of what I'm going to talk about today. There's a technology part to it, but there's also kind of a human behavior part to it, right? So the technology that we have at our disposal today is a tool that we're given, and how we behave towards it and towards each other with this technology tool is a human behavioral aspect. So first off, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a psychologist nor a clinical doctor any means. So what I'm presenting today of that topic, of that nature, if it's psychology or human behavior, is something that I've shamefully stolen and borrowed from others, right? And if I misrepresent any of that material, it's purely my fault and nothing to do with the people that I quote or reference in my slides. The second thing I'll be showing a lot of today are some numbers and statistics. And these numbers were taken or collected in surveys before the pandemic outbreak. So there's a lot of bias or a fair representation of the current state because of that, because things have changed a lot in the last year and a half or 2 years. So just keep that in mind when you look at those numbers. They might be a bit conservative in some respect. And as I said before, now that we have more people in the conference, feel free to interrupt at any time. Just either raise your hand, put something in the chat, or even unmute yourself. Since we're a small crowd, I don't mind if you unmute yourself and raise a question throughout the presentation. All right, so let's move on with another question. Let's take a moment and try to reflect how much time do we actually spend on the screen every day? And let's start with ourselves first, right? Without looking at our children or our teens, how do we spend time on the screen? How much time do we spend on the screen? And let's try to quantify that with a number, right? Let's pick a number: 3 hours, 5 hours, 8 hours, right? Let's reflect a little bit on that and not just say a lot or a little or nothing, right? Let's put a number to that, even if it's 0 or some number, and take a few minutes and think about that for yourself, right? And write that number down, right? Because we're going to come back to that number a little bit. And then and make that maybe an average number. Maybe in the weekend you're spending more or less than the weekdays. So think of that as well. And then now also ask the same question about one of your kids, or even all of your kids if you want to write their numbers down. Try to estimate how much time do you think they spend on the screen each day. And screen here, I kind of mean not just the phone, but TV, laptops, anything else that has a digital interface, right? And let's think about those numbers. And one more question before we proceed is, how much time would you quantify of that number that you put down? Let's say you put 5 hours a day. How much of those 5 hours do you spend for work, and how much for something else? And if it's for your child, how much do you think they spend of their hours for homework, and how much for something else? And what I'm trying to do here is I want to start us to think more about our relationship to this technology, right? So this is a first step in terms of trying to self-reflect and think about how much time we spend on the screen each day. And the reason of that, to do that, right? It's if we start looking at technology as anything else we have in our lives, right? Like, and a good analogy I usually give, or that's usually given by psychiatrists, is food, right? So we have a relationship with food, and a good and healthy relationship with food starts by being mindful and aware of what we are eating, right? And not just eating for the sake of eating. And I think a good way to look at technology is to be mindful and aware of how much we're consuming of it, and not just doing it for the sake of doing the purpose or the task that we want to do with that technology. And this idea will come clearer throughout the presentation today. That there's a relationship we have with this technology, and it is important that we are aware of that relationship and the parameters by which it exists, right? And right now we're trying to quantify it in the terms of number of hours we deal with it. And now we can take a look at, compare these numbers, at least if you want, with what we know about national averages. So this is here a couple of slides of how much time on a national average. This is data collected in before 2020, before the pandemic, as I mentioned earlier, and in 2019 on children ages 0 to 8. That's the slide that you see on the right, and the one in the center is for teens and tweens. And you can see the national averages ranging between 3 hours for 8-year-olds, and it goes anywhere between 4 to 8 hours for teens. So these are the numbers that are based on surveys. And I don't know, maybe you could compare them to the numbers that you put on paper at the beginning and see where you fit in this national survey that was done, or where you think your kids fit there. Another thing I want to mention here, there's this data source called Commonsense.org that I reference a lot in this slide deck. Commonsense.org is a very important site to know about as parents. They don't just give you data, but they also give you ratings for YouTube videos, social media apps, websites that they have investigated and went through and assessed, and they kind of rate them in terms of what are the right age groups to look at those things. So if you don't have the time to go and look at every app and discover it, check out commonsense.org and see what they have to say about those apps as you're exposing them to your children. So this gives us an idea of the national averages. And now let's take a step deeper, I guess, into actually tracking ourselves in terms of how much time do we spend on the phone each day, us or our kids. And I think there are a couple of apps, one on the Android, one on the iPhone, that I think we should all be aware of in terms of assessing how much time we're actually spending on the phone. And again, going back to that analogy with food, right? People who are on diet, they count calories and they set for themselves goals of calories to take every day, right? And the idea of the goals is to start prioritizing what you eat. And I think also a clinical psychiatrist advise on trying to set goals of number of hours you spend on the screen each day, so that you can prioritize what you spend these hours on, right? And these apps help you set those things, right? So if you're on Google or Android, right, there's something called the well-being app. You can go in there, you can set the number of hours, or you can check first how many hours do you spend really on your phone. Again, the phone is not the only screen that you have in your house, but it seems to be the one that most of us spend time on these days. And you can also use Google Family Link to track your kids if they have their own devices, how much time they're spending. And you could also set limits for them in terms of what apps they can spend so many minutes on and so forth. The same thing with the iPhone. There's something called the family sharing on iPhone that you can set up app limits and downtime goals, right, to ensure that they're not using the screen or the phone and during certain times of the day. So these are all tools for us to be more aware of this technology, right? The idea is to, the same way we like to keep a log of what we've eaten if we're on a diet, the same way I think we should start considering looking at the number of hours we're spending on the screen each day. Any questions so far? How is this going for everybody? All right, so now we'll go again, and part of the self-reflection on what we're doing on the screen. I want us to start looking now at what apps do we use the most, right? How do we spend time on the screen? And we can think about those personally. What are the apps that we actually spend most time on, and what are the apps that our kids spend their most time on? And from some of the surveys, again, this is a national survey that was taken, it was the same survey that reported the other numbers. So we see a lot of time being spent on video viewing they call it TV and video viewing, although TV viewership has declining over the years. It's being replaced by video streaming services like YouTube. So there's a lot of video streaming going on. That's the most app that's being used on the phone as well as off the phone in terms of devices. And then the second that comes up is, especially for the teens, if you look there, there's gaming and social media, right? If you add the numbers for the gaming and social media for teens, you have 22% and 16%. That's about 38%. So it's very close to streaming, to YouTube streaming, and so this is where we start focusing on what is this content, what is attracting our kids to this type of interaction with technology. And that's, I think, where I want to spend most of the day today discussing those two channels of content delivery, streaming and social media apps and gaming. The reason I'm combining gaming and social media together is because they are, if you look at the surveys again, most boys spend their time gaming, most girls spend the time on social media. So if you're looking at only social media, you're only capturing one part of the gender. And if you're looking at computer games, you're only capturing one part of the gender. I think we need to combine them together just to capture where our boys and girls are spending their time. And they are the tools, the attractiveness in both of those types of channels is similar, as we'll see in some of the slides later on. So our focus today will be on those two channels, not to belittle the other things, right? So e-reading, electronic reading is becoming also a big thing to in teens and tweens. You rarely see kids holding paper books in their hands. Many of them have Kindle and iPads where they read their material. They also lot less arts and crafts happening and more digital arts and crafts going on. So I don't want to belittle the other social media, the other types of activities you do on a digital screen, but I think for an interest of time today, we'll just focus on those two. I like to compare how things evolve over time, and this slide kind of talks about that, how things have changed over time between 2017 and 2020, just in a 3-year time period. Again, before the pandemic, I think after the pandemic, these numbers are going to be at least doubled. But before the pandemic, there's a steady increase in terms of usage on video streaming. Here we're talking only on video streaming of videos. And as the same thing for those below 8 and above 8, right? So 0 to 8, there's an increase. Between 8 to 12, there's an increase from 35% to 54% of teens of what they spend on screen is towards live streaming or streaming of videos. And we want to, so when we start looking at those technologies, we want to break it apart, right? I think we want to break it apart from two perspectives. One perspective is what's the usefulness of this technology to our teens, and the second is how is it changing their behavior. And I think today I'm more concerned about how is it changing their behavior. The usefulness, we can always see the good in technology and delivering the purpose. That's why we're using it, because there's some usefulness to it, whether it's listening to a lecture, trying to get information. If you're listening to a YouTube video, you can get information, you can get knowledge. You can listen to lectures, whether they're school lectures or other types of lectures. But what is it changing in our behavior? And I think that's what we want to be aware of and focus on today. And if we start looking at YouTube, for example, which is the most used streaming app today, you start seeing that there are lots of things that happen on the YouTube app itself that are geared towards affecting our behavior. And this is a simple slide here, again, by Commonsense, so that they've kind of analyzed what gets pushed to our kids on YouTube, right? If you're using YouTube and sharing accounts with your kids, most of what you watch and what they watch are going into the same algorithm. And that algorithm is going to spit out ads that are relevant to both ages, your age and their age. So one of the advices that we could start with is separate accounts. Use your own account to watch your YouTube videos and let your kids have their own account to watch theirs. Of course, monitor their account, but at least when they have their own account, the algorithm is going to not put ads that are suitable for your age for them, right? So you start at least reducing the harm from that effect. There are certain ads or certain content that is pushed to somebody who's above 21, above 25, that should not be pushed to somebody who's 7 or 8 years old. And that's one way to control that algorithm, by separating the accounts. And that also gives you an idea of how much time they're actually spending and you can look at their history to see what they've spent by having their own separate accounts. The other thing that YouTube does is that they of course know what you're watching or what that account is watching, and they push similar content to that similar other YouTube videos to that channel, to that account. So one thing to know about, if you don't know already, there's something called YouTube for Kids, and YouTube for Kids doesn't have this a persuasive, let's call it, technology in terms of pushing ads and content to somebody who's a kid. So if you create the accounts of your kids in YouTube for Kids, not the regular YouTube, there's less ads. There's no ads there. Some of the content is already filtered for age, but we cannot trust that. But at least some of it, that's what at least YouTube claims. And you could also restrict certain videos in YouTube for Kids, so you could have a more controlling effect on what gets pushed to your kids there. And you can monitor and filter that. So I also encourage you to go towards YouTube for Kids if you have children. And don't worry, do it perfect, and all these other YouTube videos that are attracting our kids' attentions are there. They're available. It's not that they remove the popular videos from there, but they do have the popular videos, but you at least have some control over it. All right. Questions, concerns so far? Just checking the chat. All right, so I think we want to start looking at what's the problem. Okay, they push content, they see ads. We see ads everywhere in our life. So what's the problem with ads on YouTube? And the first problem, or the first thing to be concerned about, is the nature of the content. So an analysis of the content in YouTube is mostly done for encouraging consumerism and mindless satisfaction. And this mindless satisfaction attempt, right, is to basically make you feel relaxed and make you feel content with what you're watching, so that they can push more ads to you, right? So the more time you spend on that screen, the more opportunity they have to push ads which generate money for them. So from that perspective, that becomes more of an addictive type of behavior, right? So that's how they're kind of luring in the small minds to kind of become more attention seeking to that screen, and finding comfort in looking at it, and then of course pushing more information. And we'll see more of those tactics, right? The persuasive tactics that I'm talking about, and how people design apps towards them. So we want to be aware of what our children are watching, and especially of the content that's coming up. And there's also the familiarity with this content, right? As our kids start to learn more and more of this content, there becomes a point where they think that's normal, right? So there becomes a distorted notion of what normal is and what safe and peaceful is, based on if they see so much of that in a digital format, whether it's cartoonish or real on YouTube video, and they don't interact more with real life, then they think that is normal. And the second thing that we also want to watch out for is the speed at which the content is being delivered, right? So content these days, I mean, I notice what my son watches sometimes, and he's looking at some of these history channels, right? So the historical information channels, or YouTube channels, that they give you some historical fact and they explain it for you. And there's this channel called Oversimplified. It's a history channel. Within 30 minutes or less, they cover world events, right? So the World War II, for example, is covered in less than 30 minutes. The Civil War is covered in less than 30 minutes. So in a very fast-paced approach, they're giving you a lot of content, even if it's educational, right? So my son sits there and watches 2 or 3 episodes of those, and his head is full of content in a very short period of time. So that kind of affects how our brains are being stimulated by this content. And the result of that speed of content delivery, right, which is not normal for a young brain, becomes affects their physical life. So affects their sleep patterns and affects their interaction with reality. So that's another thing we need to watch out for, not just the content, but also the speed at which the content is being delivered. And a few more things that we'll talk about in a few slides is the addictive nature of this content. Things like fear of missing out, right? If there's a new video that came out from Dude Perfect, every kid has to watch it because they're going to talk about it the next day in school, right? So if they haven't watched it yet, they feel that they're missing out on something. And of course, the time they're spending there is less time they're giving attention to their real life. So that's kind of how psychiatrists start shaping up the problem of content on the digital platforms. Right. I'll take a pause a little bit here from the problem of streaming and shift to the problem of social media before we start talking about how do we solve these problems, or how do we deal with these problems in our family life and from a church perspective. So before I jump into social media, any questions so far on streaming and how that affects our kids and family life?
I have a question for you, Deacon.
Yes, Father.
Maybe it's two. I was struck by one of your slides that showed that tweens are spending more time, if you do combined, in the gaming realm and was it social media?
Social media apps, yeah, social media apps, yep.
And that there was a change with teenagers, that there was a shift, a little bit lessening. I suppose that's some growing maturity and some other interests that happened there. But as far as the problem, wondering what you were just talking about, the rapid speed of the information that's being sent their way. Is there any indication that is diminishing their ability for sustained focus on things off screen?
Yes. Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit more about those the ADHD, right? So there's a scientific link today between the time you spend on screen and attention deficit disorder in kids, and it's driven by this nature of the content being delivered very high speed. They're not willing to wait for anything, so within a matter of seconds, not minutes, matter of seconds, they dismiss something if they don't get what they want out of it. So from a scientific perspective, ADHD has been linked to the time spent on screen. So we have to find ways to combat that, I guess, in terms of getting them to focus more. And I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so social media, let's move to another slide. So I like to show these graphs for a few reasons. First, they list the popularity of all social media apps, right? And they compare what teens believe to be their favorite. So the plot that you see on the right is the usage across all age groups, and it includes adult. And this is not, so the plot on the right is not a survey, it's actual numbers of accounts by social media platform, the one that is brown and orange. The one that you see on the left is what teens say or report. So that's a survey. Say or report is their favorite app, right? And so you'll see that on the right, Facebook is still in the lead in terms of where people are. But what our teens are saying is more important to them are things like Snapchat and Instagram. So most of the people that are on Facebook are not teens, right? So that's what's happening here. So very few people are teens and tweens. So if we are there and we think that's the only place they are, and we are wrong, right? So our teens are on other apps. And I also want you to notice, if you look at Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat, they report very low counts in terms of worldwide population accounts, but these accounts are mostly for the teens and the young adults, or the teens and the tweens. And then if you look at the change, sorry, let's go back to this, the change between 2015 and 2020, right? In 5 years, what used to be the leading in 5 years was maybe Instagram, or even Facebook was high up there, right? Instagram and Facebook were high up in 2015. And then and 5 years later, it's flipped, right? So Instagram, Snapchat is leading. So things are changing. And so if you have kids like me, 12 and 7, what might be popular for my 12-year-old is not going to be popular for my 7-year-old, right? And this change is not only happening within the same family. There's also changes in localities. What might be popular in the school district is not popular in another school district, right? So this popularity of social media apps is very unstable, right? So it's not like when we grew up, we had the TV, and the TV is popular. Everybody had the TV, so the interaction with that technology was the same. And there's the same interface in terms of interacting with that technology. You have the remote control, you have the volume, and you have the screen, the screen, right? Whereas now with these apps, each generation of apps has its own interaction capability, right? Some of the apps, they interact by chatting, others by pictures, others by likes, clicks, others by swiping, others by asking you to take videos of yourself. So the interface is different in each of these apps. And that change in the interaction between the technology and the human is going to be ever changing from now on. And we're looking at new technology coming to the market in the next 5 years, where you're no longer watching a screen, but you're putting devices on your head, on your faces, and stepping into a digital world, right? We talk about the metaverse and all the stuff. That's what this is. Now you step into a digital reality. And that's what's going to be 5 years from now, right? My 7-year-old is not going to be satisfied with a phone, right? She's going to want to step into the metaverse and deal there. So from a parent's perspective, right, what is it that we need to look or watch out for in these different interfaces of dealing with technology, right? And I think that's what we should focus on, not more than what the fact that they're using the technology or not, right? Because as I said before, we need to separate between the tool itself, because the tool might be useful, but then the effect on human behavior, right? And I think as parents, it might be better for us to focus on the human behavioral effect of that tool, because we don't want them to, I think the tool is going to exist. If it's a good tool and it has usefulness into society, it's going to exist. And at some point they have to deal with it. So it's better for us to teach them how to deal with it, as opposed to prevent them from accessing it and then them sneaking around and accessing it in the wrong behavior, doing the wrong thing with it. Same way you teach your kids how to deal with alcohol and drugs, as opposed to just say no, because at 21 they're going to drink a beer, right? So you want them to know how to deal with that before they actually do it. And I think that's the type of approach we should take with social media and apps, is how do we deal with the behavior change that it inflicts on us. I think this is my slide before. This is almost the last slide on statistics and data, so bear with me if you're not a data person. So this talks about the social effect that this is the measured. So well, this is not the measure. This is what teens think social media is for them, right? So if you ask the teen, why do you spend so much time on social media? Are you enjoying it? Is it good for you? And some of the questions here, some of the answers here come up that they don't feel the harm, right? They feel that they're being more connected with their friends. Of course, their definition of friendship is slightly different than what we expect friendship to be. But from their perspective, they have now a way to connect with their friends that they didn't have before, especially during the pandemic. That's the only way they were able to connect with their friends, probably. And some of them are also coping to what we would call depression symptoms, right? So there is this funny relationship today in the science world between depression and social media. Some scientists say that social media is a good tool for those who are depressed. Others are saying they are depressed because of the time they spend on social media. So there is a correlation, right? So there is a correlation between the two. However, the causality has not been yet understood or scientifically proven. So we just need to be aware of that as parents, that if our kids start showing signs of depression in their day-to-day life, we need to be aware and try to see if the technology they're being exposed to is causing that, and maybe help them limit that a little bit. I think that's from a point of awareness. I think we should be aware that there is something going on in the world today between depression and the use of technology, and I think we should be aware of that as parents, as responsible parents. So we've covered these topics, right? Screen, video streaming, social media. And what I want to go over for the next few slides is what's the impact on our kids' health. And I'll summarize. I've been kind of giving you some points as I'm talking, but now I'll summarize them in one slide as the impact on our kids' health. And then I want to talk, why is it that we are hooked as human beings? Why does this ability not to let go, right, or the lack of ability of letting go, why is it there? What happens there? And is it our fault, or whose fault? Not that somebody's to blame, but why do we feel that it is addicting? It is addictive in nature. And then we'll talk a little bit how to control this passion. And I'm using the word passion here from our theological training and religious perspective, right? And we'll talk about why we think, or I think, this is a passion. All right, so what is the impact on our kids and their health? And again, as I said before, I'm not a psychiatrist. I steal information from psychologists. So so Dr. Randa Anderson, I don't know if anybody has met or know her. She's a licensed clinical psychologist and a member of the Orthodox Christian Counseling Institute. She co-chairs the task force for the mental health of the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Bishops. She's very well trained, very well versed, and has lots of podcasts and lectures on this topic itself. I think she would have been a better speaker at this retreat than I would have been. But last time I spoke, I happened to meet with her after my talk, and we kind of discussed some of these topics. And I think she's a good resource to follow if you're interested to know more about this topic. So she kind of summarizes the effect of technology on our kids in this slide, right? So she says sleep loss and disruption is definitely happening because of technology. And that's why she recommends no screen time whatsoever for the last 25 to 30 minutes before going to bed. And of course, she recommends leaving the phone away from the bedroom and no screen in the bedroom. The tech neck, right? Injuries to the neck, pain in the neck when you're looking at your phone like this, right? Increase in stress. We talk about increase in stress from the perspective of what the technology does in terms of interrupting our focus, right? So you're doing something, you get a notification. You're going to stop and look at that notification. The science shows that stop that you did and going back to where you stopped takes you on average 23 minutes to go back to where you are in your focus. And if constantly being stopped, you're never going to go back to focus. And that 23-minute lost, if you accumulate those, that's a lot of time that you're repeating or wasting. And that causes you stress because you cannot finish what you started with, right? So that's how they analyze the effect of technology in terms of increasing stress. Weaker social relationships. We notice that as somebody who now hires people in my company, I interview people and I notice the social skills that these people come in with. They're young people, they're in their 20s or early 20s, because they've spent so much time on social media before. It's very hard for them to interact socially in real life, right? So, and you can start noticing some of that behavior from your kids and maybe try to interrupt it early. So for example, having a verbal discussion with somebody. How does somebody respond to when you say hello to them or good morning? Or how do they respond when you try to shake their hand? Or how do they respond? How do they talk to you? Do they look at your eyes, or do they keep eye contact? So those things you don't actually teach your kid, right? They happen to learn because they do them as they're growing up. And the fact that they're not doing those activities anymore, right? They're losing that ability to connect socially with other people in real life. We talked about increase in depression and loneliness, diminished capacity for attention, ADHD. We spoke about that, right? The link between that and the screen time. There's less time spent reflecting, right? So there's no downtime, right? If there's downtime, they're on the screen. And because there's no downtime, there's no boredom. And there's no boredom. That means there's no imaginative thinking, no innovative thinking going on in our kids' brain anymore. And then we talk about things that are of logistical nature, like loss of privacy. We need to kind of be aware of how non-private is our life in a social context, in a social media context or a digital context. Everything we do there is being tracked, whether it's visible to our friends or visible to the companies that put out these apps, Google or Facebook or what have you. Texting while driving, that's a big concern. Although now some of our teens are less into texting, but more into other things, but still, texting driving is a big concern. Legal troubles, and this is a big thing. 1 in 4 teens have reported that they do sexting, and sexting in some states is considered pornographic and borders on child trafficking. So they might get sued because of what they're sharing on their social media apps. And addictions, and we talked about the overuse of technology, or at least researchers classify tech overuse as a behavioral addiction today. So the list is long, and we have to find ways to approach these symptoms, I call them, or the symptoms of overuse of technology. Right. So if we try to figure out why is it that our kids are getting hooked, and why are we sometimes getting hooked, and is this only because of our misuse of the technology, or is there something else going on? And the reason I use the word hooked is because that's what the people who build these apps and the business schools that teach how to build these apps and make money from them, that's what they kind of label that, right? They're after hooking the consumer. This is intentional, right? So from their perspective, there's a lab in Stanford that pioneered this back 10 years ago, and it used to be called the Stanford Persuasive Technology Lab. They decided to change their name to the Behavior Design Lab because they felt that was a bit offensive. But anyway, so and this book Hooked is one of the best sellers in Silicon Valley, right? So people are building apps for this purpose, for the purpose of hooking us into using them, right? They don't want you to let go of the app. So that adds to the problem, right? It's not just our weak nature as human beings, or our susceptibility to this, but also the other side is kind of reaching out and grabbing us and trying to make us stay there. So we need to be aware of that, right? That we need to be aware that it's not only a one-sided weakness, it's a two-sided approach that we need to battle. And I want to take a break from speaking myself. So I'm going to make you watch a video for 5 minutes, if you don't mind. And this video is basically what the app designers themselves and app designers and features of apps, right? So sometimes we talk about the app, but it's really the people who design the features inside the app. So let's say an app the notification has a red color. There's research that went into deciding that color of the notification should be red. It's not like an artistic decision. There's a research component to it that made studies of, if I do a green notification button versus a gray one versus a red, which one's going to hook people more? And the people we're going to listen to are the people who are behind this type of research and thinking of how to create features and apps that will hook the user. And then let's listen to this video for a few seconds. It's going to be a 5-minute video, and then we'll continue after that. So let's see if I can make sure the audio comes out properly. All right.
We've just invented a gun, and it can be pointed at anyone.
The phone goes off in your pocket. That's the trigger. You check the phone. That's the action. The question is, what comes up on that phone? Maybe it's good. Maybe it's bad.
It's not just about addiction. That just sets up the jack. So it's like nice and sturdy in 2 billion people's brains. Now, once that jack exists, now you have this business model of advertising that says, just pay me and I'll put thoughts in the most vulnerable minds. Just tell me their zip code.
Is Silicon Valley programming apps, or are we programming people? Coming up with Infinite Scroll was just the joy of creating something that felt better. It was really simple. It's just like, hey, here's one way in which we don't have to ask the user to make a choice that they don't care about. And so the thought was, why don't we just take the content that's on this second page? The user is already scrolling. Scrolling already means show me more. So we just load in extra content and place it beneath and place it beneath and place it beneath. And this gave rise to infinite scroll. And we started seeing it popping up on other blogs, and then it just started appearing everywhere. And I was so enamored of this idea that I went around and like gave a talk at Google, talked all over the valley, being like, guys, this is a better interface for users, not realizing that by removing the stopping cue from the human, just like when you have a soup bowl and you slowly feed in more soup, people eat way more food and contributes to obesity, that this is going to directly contribute hundreds of millions of hours of wasted time to the obesity of our minds.
You know, our team joined Google in late 2011, early 2012, and I became a product manager around sort of future-looking assistant and Google inbox email type applications. I made a slide deck that was kind of a manifesto, and it said, basically, we, never before in history have 50 designers who look like me, 20 to 35-year-old white engineers from California, decided what 1 billion people's attention or thoughts will be in a day, and that we have this enormous responsibility in how we're shaping and influencing people's minds. I designed it in a very high-impact way, and I sent it to 10 people for feedback. I went to work the next morning when I got on the Google bus, and I turned around. There was several different laptops that had it open on their screen, and so I really knew that it had created, a brief but important cultural moment.
Even if nobody at a company is evil, and almost everyone in Silicon Valley is not evil, we all wake up and we go to work thinking we're doing something good for the world, but in the end, you're getting judged based on this number, which is how much time of your users you're getting. Like, that's what your life, your promotions, your salary depends on. That's what you're going to optimize.
I think that it wasn't through some kind of conscious process, but the engagement-based model is just so efficient at generating large amounts of revenue and the promise of revenue. Most people forget most of these apps didn't have any advertising, and you just assume that you're going to bake it in later. And that assumption comes from the fact that you have this business model in your back pocket called advertising that just says, if I can generate billions of users and hours of activity per user, I can just throw ads on that and suddenly I can make lots of money.
We used to have something called boredom. And boredom, for lack of a better word, is good. Because boredom is the time that you have imagination, where you actually create, where you actually grow specific neural connections. And we have taken that away because of technology filling that boredom void.
When you ask the question, what is technology doing to us? Then you have to take a microscope and hold it over a human animal, and right when you expose it to, say, a notification, like ding, and then you see it, a message from your friend saying something. Let's say that person turns their phone over and they go back to what they're doing. There's still an impact on that human animal. An impact in terms of thoughts that they're now thinking that they weren't going to think before. Feelings that they're now having, worries, anxieties. Oh no, I have to get back to that person. I better get back to it. But they're going to think I need, all those thoughts start coming up. And then physiological levels where your stress response starts going up.
If you distract someone, it takes 23 minutes on average to be able to get back to the same place in terms of the project or process that you were in.
And just imagine an ant colony, and now give a little phone to every ant in the ant colony. All of a sudden they start looking down at and now Facebook can just turn a lever and make all the ants move this direction or that direction. And that's both powerful and also terrifying. If you can hit a button and waste half an hour of every one of those ants' lives, just think about what that does.
We have to recognize that this is a public health issue, and it's going to require a public health solution.
And the biggest and most significant change that happened when Google announced the Wellbeing Initiative is they're basically saying it's our responsibility as the people who make the product to design it in a different way that's more humane and that puts users' interests first.
All right. Any thoughts, comments? So going back to what we were talking about before, right? So we heard about the infinite scroll in the video, right, from the inventor himself, right? So these are some of the features that we spoke about that kind of help us, not help us, but they misdirect us into staying into these apps, right? Infinite scroll, infinite streaming, the video links inside the videos, right? We have to click on that link to see what that means. Sometimes we have the fear of missing out. Did we click that link or not? We go back to the video, click it again. Embedded links, notifications, we spoke about that. And now with smartwatches, this is following around even if we don't have our phone nearby. So all these features in the apps, I think, are things we need to watch out for. And one of the recommendations from an active involvement, I guess, or from a perspective of being more aware of what you're doing with this technology, right, is to kind of stop many of those things. You can stop notifications on your phone. You can stop looking at infinite scrolls by putting a certain time limit of how much you spend on that app. Open Facebook and say, I'm going to get out there in 5 minutes or 2 minutes and do that, and not get stuck, or put a reminder or an alarm that triggers after 2-3 minutes of opening a social media app. So trying to be more active in your engagement with the technology as opposed to being more reactive and reacting to what the technology is telling you is one of those ways that we can adopt, and us as well as in teaching our kids of how to behave or deal with the technology is going to be important. There's this whole idea of active intermittent reinforcement, right? So the apps are built in such a way that they give you the hope of something fun or something happy that's about to happen, right? So when you look at this infinite scroll, you're hoping to see something enjoyable, whether some news about your friends, something of what they're doing that you could share with them the next day or talk about in the next day or gossip about. So that's why you're doing those things, right? As a teenager, you're hopeful of a reward. And that's one of the tricks psychologists say that they use to teach people to do the good things, but it's also being used now in technology to get us to do more of what they want us to do. The fear of missing out, right? We spoke about this before. Our teens suffer today from fear of missing out on an hourly basis, not daily or weekly basis, on an hourly basis. In the past, you'd go to school, come back home, that's it. There's no more sharing of information until the next day you go to school. So the fact that you might have missed out on something socially in your school is the likelihood of that's going to happen is very low because there's no other interaction going on. But if you're not on a certain social media platform after school hours, where most of the activity happens, and you go to school the next day, you're going to have this FOMO experience that I missed out on something yesterday or something that happened on the school bus or something. So that whole idea of I need to be aware of what's going on with my friends, right? So that next day I don't feel I'm left out of the circle. So that FOMO experience is our teens suffer from that on a daily basis, and that's causing more and more depression to happen, right? So that's one of the causes of depression today is the fear of missing out. And so how do we control this passion, right? And the reason I label it as a passion, right, is again, I'm not a psychiatrist, right? But as a father of a 12-year-old and a 7-year-old, this is part of the challenge we have every day with our kids, right? Remember that quotation from Socrates at the beginning, right? He was afraid of the written word, and again, the books were also something that were fearful at one point. So was the TV and the radio. So sometimes I come across, I'm picking up my kids from middle school or elementary school, and I come across some kids on the street walking and reading, right? They're reading while walking on the sidewalk. I don't know if you've witnessed this picture, right? You walk and you see some child opening up a book and walking. So I ask myself, is this good or bad? Is what this kid doing, reading on the sidewalk, a good thing or a bad thing? And sometimes you might think, okay, well, she's reading a book, that might be a good thing, but we have to be careful of the behavior here, right? What is that book, even though it's just a book, what is that book affecting the behavior of the child? That the child could not wait this 10, 12, 15-minute walk to their home to read it there. Why did the child have to open the book and read it on the way? And that's what we are concerned about, I think, or we should be concerned about. It's the behavioral change that these tools and technologies are affecting our kids. So in my opinion, this is a very dangerous activity, right? Reading a book while on the sidewalk is dangerous. But sometimes we might turn our eyes towards and say, it's okay, it's just a book. And today, because technology is new, we're not saying that about technology, but maybe in a few years, we'll start saying that, oh, it's just a cell phone. It's not the metaverse, right? So we need to kind of be aware of the behavioral change that this is affecting on us. So from an Orthodox perspective, right? And what's going on here is basically there's something grabbing our attention as humans, and it's forcing us or our kids to be completely kind of entangled or enslaved in this thing that they're doing, and this also feeds on us, and then we let it feed on us, and as a result, that's why I kind of call this a passion, right? So it's like any other addiction, right? So the passions, by definition, they're inherent in it's an inherent weakness in the human being that entices us to sin. And now, okay, well, are we sinning if we look at our social media app? Are we sinning if we watch a YouTube video? And if we want to go into the details of is this an actual sin, right? So it might be, right? If we're not spending the same amount of time praying or doing charity or working towards our repentance and salvation, if we're not doing those things, we're doing this other thing, then maybe it is a sin, right? Maybe it is a sin with the definition of being away from God or being doing less of what we're supposed to be doing. And by labeling it as a passion, right, this makes it easier for us as whether it's clergy or parents in the church, because now we know how to deal with passions, right? We have 2,000 years of experience doing that as Christianity. And there was I don't know if many of you listened to Dr. Mamalakis's talk yesterday about using the poverty of spirit in leadership and in parenting, right? So the poverty of spirit is how do we use that capability that the church teaches us to nourish in ourselves, right? How to serve and how to listen so that everyone gets heard, right? So we cannot approach this from it's my will or the highway, right? Do what I tell you to do, otherwise there's no cell phone. That should not be the attitude we take with this, right? We have to respect their learning and their development because they're going through that as kids. We have to listen to them, and we have to understand why they're doing what they're doing, right? And then that so we have to, as they start growing, I think what Dr. Mamalakis said yesterday, as our kids start to grow, we have to talk less and listen more to them, right? So that we can understand their perspective. And the approach we need to take here is also from that perspective. We cannot just say we want to police you, we want to control you, and that's it. You get 30 minutes and I'm going to lock you out of that technology. That's going to backfire in a sense, because as we saw in those statistics, these apps are going to mature and evolve much faster than we can keep a handle of as human beings, as adults, right? So there will be technology that we do not understand, we will not know how to use, and our kids will know how to use, and they will always trick us around that. So we cannot build our control system, our policing system around what we can do to lock them out of technology, I guess. So that's one of the things where we have to understand why they're using it and then educate them on the right behavior to have with it. So that's where I kind of try to find some analogies here between other passions that we have dealt with in the past, like the love of food, gluttony, love of money, right? Greed, lust. How do we deal with these passions? And can we learn from that way of dealing with these passions to kind of deal with technology? And I kind of put forth this, I don't know, this is my own innovation here. So if you don't like it, critique it, or that's fine. So I think there should be a three-pronged approach, right? There should be a spiritual effort. There should be an active physical effort. And as Christians, we don't do things individually. There should be a communal effort. And if we start approaching this situation from those three perspectives, right? The spiritual effort, meaning prayer and fasting, right? So we want to cure it from that perspective. So we have to kind of put those three efforts together. So with prayer and fasting, right? So what do we mean by prayer and fasting? So with prayer, because we kind of spoke about, we need to be aware of our use of technology, right? We need to take a conscious effort to say, I'm going to use the screen today for only 3 hours or 4 hours, or whatever number of hours, put a number and try to meet that number. And if you're conscious of that number, you're going to start prioritizing how you spend it. We said that before, but also you're going to prioritize or be conscious of when you actually pick up the phone, right? As time progresses with your rule and regiment that you've put for yourself, you're going to actively pick up the phone as opposed to letting that notification call for you, come pick me up, right? So if you turn off all notifications, you turn off all the things that might distract you from what you're actually doing, from that phone, from that device, you're going to spend less time reacting to it and more time acting towards it. So you'll be in charge of that act. And since you're in charge of that act, like we do in anything else, as you start a new act, you say a prayer. So you could say a Jesus prayer before you pick up your phone. So that's the kind of, so now you're asking for help when you're doing that, right? You're asking for help from Christ to guide you in that action as any other action that you're doing. So if you convert that reactive behavior with the technology to being a more active behavior, you have control of when to insert your prayers in there. And if we teach our kids that approach, right, then they're more aware of what they're doing and they're involving Christ in what they're doing, and hopefully Christ will help them, because it's not for us to actually get them out from there. It's Christ who's going to get them out from there. And the fasting part, the fasting part has also another interesting aspect to it when it comes to technology. So when we fast from food, right, the first feeling we might get is this feeling of hunger, right? Or hunger towards a certain type of food, whether it's hunger in general or hunger towards a certain type of food. That first feeling of hunger we get at the beginning of a fast is giving us an assessment of how much connected we were to that thing before we fasted, right? So if I'm going to start fasting tomorrow, I'm going to feel hungry towards a bar of chocolate, right? And I'm going to say, oh, that's how dependent I was on that bar of chocolate. Otherwise, I wouldn't have felt hunger towards it, right? And I think the same way, if we do that with technology, it will make our kids aware of how dependent they are on a certain thing in technology, whether it's YouTube videos or social media apps or gaming or whatever it is. And when that happens, I think it's for us parents to start a discussion with them, right? When they feel that urge to go back, if we discuss that feeling with them, we will realize how mature they are about that feeling, how capable they are of understanding that feeling and doing something about it. So I think we need to kind of play on that. We need to trigger that to happen in our kids so that we can have that communication with them. And that is where we teach them on the right behavior of whatever that thing is that they have hunger for. So again, Dr. Randa Anderson kind of proposes a fast of technology every once in a while in a week during the great fasts. So these are type of so one way of kind of involving this other thing we do in our life, which is our relationship with technology, to be part of our Christian life. I see some questions here. Yes, so yep. So somebody saying that in addition to the spiritual effort, could sharing all these facts educate them about dangers of social media with teens, make any positive difference in their behavior? So definitely yes. So the education part, I think educating them just from the perspective of throwing our opinions on them, I think doesn't work anymore with teens, right? They're opinionated, they have their opinions, they can always rebuttal that. But showing them how much damage it is doing to their life by letting them experience that damage, right? I think then we have the entryway to educate them. because they will seek help, whether it's from us or from somebody else they know in our community. That's the communal part, right? They will seek help because once they know the damage. But if we just preach to them, stop doing this, don't do that, it's going to be a struggle, right? Because their attention span is not with us anymore. If we already have somebody who is older than 5 or 6 years old who's already hooked into a screen or a social media app for some reason, I don't know why, but at that young age, but if they are in that zone, it's very hard to get their attention to focus with you. And there are lots of problems with that. That's why one of the other things, we'll talk about that in a few slides, of how to delay the introduction of technologies into their life, which is actually not too far away, which is this coming slide here. So the second part, right? The first was the spiritual effort. The second part is the active physical effort. And now, because we're actively engaged, right, we start putting these rules on how we use technology. I said before, again, this is from Dr. Anderson, turn off all notifications. There's no need for us to have any notifications on our phone, except maybe the emergency ones. So if it's our kid, maybe we let them receive notifications from us, their parents, or from emergency contacts, but that's it. No, there needs to be no other notification that comes to their screen. There's no use for that, right? No technology at the meal table, keep computers out in the open. It is important that we take an active role in looking at what they're doing, right? It's true we don't need to police and control them, but we need to be aware of what's going on. And that's part of us detecting symptoms of depression, detecting symptoms of abnormal sleep behavior, but also detecting what they're doing on the screen. Keep the bedroom tech-free, right? So the bedroom by design, psychological design, it's a safe place for a child. And the moment you start introducing this external influence, whether it's YouTube streams or social media apps, you're kind of reaching into that safe room and introducing the FOMO effect. You're introducing the depression effect of look what other people are doing. You're introducing this bullying, cyberbullying effect. All this is being introduced into the bedroom, and that is a very harmful psychological trait that we are introducing to our kids' life by not giving them a safe zone. Get alarm clocks. There's no need for them to wake up on an alarm that's from the phone. Alarm clocks are maybe $5, $6 a piece. That's much cheaper than paying a psychiatrist to handle depression later on in their life. Try to get a 24-hour tech-free day, all the family if possible. And then set admin, set admin privileges. Admin privilege and parental control, not from the perspective of policing, but more from the perspective of knowing what's going on, right? I think knowing that's going on, and that also goes again with be a friend or follow your kids on social media. Let them know that you are there, right? So again, they're growing, so they need to know that they're being supervised, and they need to know that there are wrong actions and good actions, and bad actions and good actions, and they need to be aware that there's somebody looking at that, right? That's part of their growth. Wait until 8th grade. That's a campaign that many school districts run, right? They don't want kids to have any devices before 8th grade. Just so that they don't have the peer pressure in the schools. And some of these campaigns have been very successful in some school districts. So again, try to delay the introduction of these technologies to your kids. That will help them. That'll help you talk to them. And then make them earn it, right? So make them work for it, make them earn their time on the screen as well as the device, right? And check your kids' browser history periodically. That's something I think we should all as part of, again, being aware what our kids are doing. And then the last thing here is basically try to teach that nothing is ever private on the internet, right? There's nothing that they do on the internet that's private, and that needs to be ingrained in their head, right? Sometimes they feel because no human presence is there, they can do whatever they want, and that's the idea that we should not let propagate far in their brains. And I think that's it. I have one more slide. The last slide is some useful resources. I mentioned Dr. Anderson before. I encourage you to listen to some of her talks. Commonsense Media, again, there's a free and paid version of the subscription to Commonsense Media. It's a very good place to get ratings on apps, games, by age group, by gender, see what other psychiatrists are saying about some certain apps. And lastly, look at what your local school districts are saying about technology safety practices. As I mentioned before, there are lots of these apps that are very localized in terms of how they become viral, become popular. And the school districts are more aware of those than at the national level. If you, at the beginning of this school year, I don't know if some of you had this in their school districts, where there was this TikTok challenge where teens and middle school kids were encouraged to vandalize bathrooms in schools through this TikTok challenge. And some of the school districts had to put police officers in the schools to prevent that from happening, or close down restrooms and the bathrooms. So again, those are very localized events that happen through social media, and being aware of them is, again, part of being an active participant in how we deal with technology, as opposed to a reactive participant. All right, I'll take more questions if anybody has questions.
Deacon, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Hey, thank you so much for doing this. George is listening in the background. And maybe I should just look on Commonsense, or maybe call you some other time. But like, so I want to let him watch YouTube and TikTok because, you know, it's a whole thing. But and he has really good judgment about it. But at first I put on parental controls, but then it blocked like so
Everything.
much. Yeah. And so I didn't know if there's a better way to, but then when I took the controls off, and he has good judgment usually, but like things always come up that are inappropriate. So I didn't know if there's a way to, you know.
So on the YouTube side, I would encourage use YouTube Kids. He will still get some of the videos he watches on, most of the videos are there, at least without the ads, but at least you're aware of controlling video by video. If certain things come up, you can block them there, or you can block them before they come up on YouTube Kids. And on TikTok, I don't know. I feel, I know George. He's still young for TikTok, I think. That's my personal opinion, right? So there are certain things that we need to kind of delay, even though I know he's more creative and he's maybe pushing things that from a creative nature, but maybe channel that through some other medias, right? So they're hard. I mean, those new social media apps that come out there, they're already rated for teens, right? So they come rated on the Google Play and the iPhone as rated for teens, and introducing kids who are not teens yet to them is a challenge in terms of how we police and control them.
Yeah. At one point, we had to just put TikTok. We had to completely stop TikTok because we couldn't figure out a way to filter it. So that's good to know. Thank you. And then I also have a question, like that fear of missing out. I mean, other than like giving them like a perspective on the situation and building them up in all these other ways, like I didn't know if you had a specific
yeah, I mean, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I know I can share with what I do with my kids, right? So I think there are a couple of things I focus on with FOMO, right? One is self-esteem, right? There's an important part of FOMO as a result of low self-esteem that leads us there. So that's one thing I would focus on. And the second is give them opportunity to interact with people outside of the school time in real life, right? So at least there's something going on in their life. They're not just sitting at home doing nothing. Exactly. Right. So I think those two things my wife and I try to put in our kids, that you have good self-esteem. You don't need to know what other people are doing to judge yourself, right? And the second is you're doing something else. Why didn't they know about it, right? So, right. So those two things, if you kind of play with those two aspects of FOMO, I think, I don't know how far we'll go with it, but that's at least what we're trying.
That's helpful. That's what we're doing to the extent possible too. But you know, and he says like usually it doesn't bother him, but every once in a while it bothers him. And I said, well,
and it's good he's talking about it. I mean, at least you know that he's bothered by it, and that communication should stay. He should not feel afraid of talking and expressing that. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah. Nice to see you.
Thank you too. Thank you.
Anyone else? Father David, I know we have till 1, right? We have you, or
Yes, yeah, we can go up to 1 if there's more
Yeah.
questions or discussion.
I have a question, Father Luke.
hey, Father Luke, how are you?
Yeah, I'm asking someone I know that I can ask you offline, but I think it's useful how to, because one question that comes up from our children when we talk about, okay, this is not appropriate. How do we define age appropriate, inappropriate? Because like, how would you explain something that they don't know, that it's not appropriate, but they don't know it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, these are all psychiatry questions. I don't know. So I don't. My perspective on this is the age brackets defined by science and psychiatry sometimes don't apply to our kids, who are especially kids who are maybe more involved in church life or less involved. Every kid is different, right? So we need to, as parents, be cautious of these age brackets, right? Age brackets help guidance in general, but they're not specific to an individual sometimes. So age appropriateness might be discussed from this. So something might be age appropriate for an 18-year-old and not a 13-year-old or 12-year-old. That's a big gap, right? So, but how do we describe it to them? I don't know. My approach is if it's already at their door in terms of questions, right? That means they're faced with it somewhere, whether it's at school or with their friends, or they've so by some mistake of ours they were able to see it or hear about it, whatever that thing is. So we need to address it, and now it becomes something. It's a problem we have to address with them. We cannot just brush it off and say, wait till you're 18 and we'll talk about this. I don't think that will satisfy their curiosity, especially if they're above 8 or 9, right? If they're in that age group, they're going to be curious and try to find an answer on their own. And I think we have to, I guess, figure out a way. I don't know how much the church is putting out information out there, or the youth ministry is putting out information. That's where I would go to see what they're describing, how they describe things for a 9-year-old that is for a 13-year-old. I think that's where we need some guidance as parents. What do we say? I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that, but that's part of the struggles when my son comes and asks a question that a 21-year-old should ask or an 18-year-old should ask. And that's, I don't know. It's a hard challenge. I don't know if I answered your question, but it's a challenge. And